The red ink drowning equity markets has spilled into commodities. Livestock, grain, sugar and cotton prices have all headed south. Now, there are international reasons for this, but Australia's biggest problem is our dollar. We export more than 60% of what we grow on farms. Consequently, the farm sector is suffering badly from the dollar skyrocket. Here's the up and up of the dollar in the past 10 months or so. From around 87 cents last August to just a touch under $1.10 a couple of weeks ago. The Commonwealth Bank's commodities analyst is Luke Matthews. His view is that the weak American dollar is part of the problem, but there are other factors in play.
The other factors that are supporting the Aussie dollar relate to our close ties with China, the strength that we have seen in Chinese, global and indeed Australian commodity prices over the past 6 to 12 months are factors that are also supporting the Australian dollar.
Where's the CBA forecasting the dollar to be, say, by September?
So by September this year, our commodity and our currency teams are forecasting the Australian dollar to hit 112 against the US greenback before easing into the December quarter to 104 US cents.
The National Farmers Federation says for every 1% rise in our dollar, Australian farmers suffer to the tune of $210 million. To the prices now, and first up, livestock, where cattle prices drifted sharply as numbers went up and quality went down. Worth noting is that slaughter numbers are down, in fact way down on monthly averages, and you can see by those prices that young cattle remain in demand, but export categories are very soft. And this left the Eastern Young Cattle Indicator at $3.96, down 4% on the pre-Easter level, but more than 50 cents up on this time last year. Sheep and lamb prices fell also. Big numbers, exchange rate pressure and cooler weather combined to put the spear into demand. And while these falls are significant, lambs are up 80 cents a kilo on last year and mutton has risen 65 cents in the same period. Now to the live trade, where the official end to the wet season is seeing a lift in activity, and for producers and exporters it hasn't come too soon. The wet season was the toughest for years, for many reasons. From Darwin, here's Luke Bowen from the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association.
The one issue that we have had in relation to the wet season, and in the top end particularly, is the ability of producers, or inability of producers, to get their produce to the ship. The road network has been hammered, and it's testament to the lack of investment that has taken place over the last 10 or 15 years, that when you get a bit of an unusual year, everything breaks down.
Sounds like a local problem. Luke, what about the two big overhanging issues, weights and permits to Indonesia? What's the latest there?
The Indonesian government has announced at the end of last year 500,000 head for this current year. We had 150,000 released for the first quarter. And we've now had 200,000 released for the second quarter. In effect, the numbers that have actually moved have been less than that, so there's going to have to be a bit of catch-up take place. Generally, however, things haven't changed in relation to the weights. We're still working with a 350 kilogram weight restriction, and we're currently working with Indonesian government to look at some greater definition about where that 350 kilograms is actually measured. At the moment, it is in Indonesia.
And of course, animal welfare remains a major issue, Luke. Some time ago, the industry took the unusual step of commissioning an independent review into animal welfare for the live exports to Indonesia. What's the result of that review?
The idea of that was to give us some idea of how we're going, given the sensitivity and the difficulty of working in what is a very complex environment in Indonesia with a very dispersed processing sector and very dispersed consumer base. We commissioned this report in order to give us a state of play, to understand where we're at. Now, the findings of that report came up that generally welfare is good. But the thing that they identified, and it certainly wasn't a first time for us because we've been working on this for years, is that there are some points in the supply chain, and particularly at the processing end, at the final stage of processing, where we need to improve. And we need to build on the improvements and the work that has already taken place now for 15 odd years in putting the right equipment and the right training in place, and we need to continue that push. We need to push and guide that process and take it through to its fruition. where we can hopefully have welfare standards more akin to what we expect in Australia, what the public expects in Australia, and at the end of the day, what is good animal welfare.
That's Luke Bowen from the Northern Territory Cattlemen's Association. The increased activity in the north has caused prices to ease. And those prices are off about 5 cents on the recent trend. Some of the biggest ships will be loading this week in the north, including Willard's giant Ocean Swagman. And dairy prices remain strong, especially for butter, but trade is subdued at present. Buyers are hesitant because of the currency issues. Now let's start the futures with a check on local trading, where the slide in our dollar has given some support to prices. East Coast wheat has been mostly unchanged, while West Australian wheat for January next year lost a few dollars and sits at $311 a tonne. And local spot markets were weak, in line with overseas trends. Falls were across the board, with increasing noise about a lack of moisture in the west. WA farmers are very nervous about a possible repeat of the disaster of last season. Now to Chicago, where the bears have been rampant. The oil price collapse, the stronger American dollar, and hedge funds running for the safe haven of the Swiss franc has led to a flood of red ink. These are the latest July contract numbers, not that much different from the expiring May contracts. The wheat number is the lowest since March. The high corn price has done its job. Exports have all but stopped, and it's a similar story with soybeans. And analysts are not expecting the bears to leave in the immediate future. They've even taken over New York, where both cotton and sugar are on the skids. Cotton futures are the lowest since January and 30% below the March record. Sugar continues to slide, with news of production upgrades in Mexico and Thailand. And finally to wool, where the fall in our dollar relative to the American currency led to the market slumping just over 1%. Buyers from China were dominant, but there was also strong support from India, Korea and Europe. Pass-in rates were high, just under 20%. So the Eastern Market Indicator closed at 1,306 cents. The season average is about 120 cents less. And that's the Landline check on prices.